The man started, suddenly feeling nervous, like he was being watched. He looked over to the nearby open window and saw a strange face peering in, watching him. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we will be discussing the fascinating case of the Bigfoot siege of Little Rock. This case involves the Stone family, Andrew and Hilda, both in their 20s at the time, and their 20-month-old son, Michael, and occurred in 1974 in Little Rock, California, known today as the Fruit Basket of Antelope County. At the time, it was home to many resort cabins and renowned for fishing, boating, and camping, and may have been better known as the Bigfoot Basket of Antelope County. The Stones moved into a home in Little Rock in the early months of 1974 and soon began having problems. And when I say soon, I mean very soon. Literally, on the second evening that they were there, the family's little dog just went bonkers, insisting that it wanted to go outside and be just left out there. Now, although they wanted to keep an eye on the dog for some time before just letting it out into unfamiliar surroundings, they finally gave in and let it out of the house. Now, as you probably expected, this was not a great idea, and it ended extremely poorly for the poor pooch. Unfortunately, and I am going to take a quick segue here, because I feel bad whenever I have to report on the not infrequent dog death in these videos. And I feel especially bad about this one. It was gruesome. The poor dog was found dismembered but not eaten near the water tank to the rear of the cabin facing the mountains. Now, in addition to this sad tale, there is also the problem of the crib. They had it set up underneath a window in their bedroom, but whenever they tried to put their young son to sleep, he would just hysterically cry. They'd pick him up, rock him, get him to sleep, put him in the crib, and he would wake up almost immediately and just go hysterical again. Eventually, they put his crib in a different spot, and there were no more problems. Now, I'll be honest, both of these incidents are circumstantial. I'll admit it. It's not impossible that the dog was killed by some other animal, and the baby, who knows, maybe he just didn't like the window for some reason. Babies are weird. Now, as we go on, there are much weirder occurrences, a little bit more difficult to pin on a coyote. A catch of fish that the Stones had tied 12 feet up a telephone pole disappeared, and what was left instead was a trackway of large three-toed footprints which led from the pole back to the mountains. Now, these three-toed footprints would be a standard sight in the area in the ensuing months. Shortly thereafter, the screams started. The Stones explained that often all other natural noises would fall completely silent in the area, and then the screaming would start up, which the Stones described as like a woman screaming. Even creepier than that, at night they would hear something like something calling mama, but not the way a human being would say it, perhaps almost a weird mimicry of human language, calling out mama over and over again from the underbrush. Other strange noises included whistles coming from the underbrush. One night, as the creepy voice began calling out mama over and over again, louder and louder, the neighborhood dogs were just going absolutely berserk when all at once something slammed into the house with such force that all of the Stones' tchotchkes fell off the walls. It would be in March when the Stones finally saw the creature. As they returned to the cabin one late afternoon after a day of grocery shopping, they rounded a curve in the road. There, standing in the shallow stream to the left of the road, was a bipedal being, standing about 12 feet tall and covered in dark black fur. They said that it appeared to be scooping up from the water, almost like maybe it was fishing or something. The Stones agreed that any experience with this dark furred figure was intensely frightening. Another time, Andrew was standing on a ridge near the home when he suddenly felt extremely anxious. He looked over and saw that same dark furred figure standing on another ridgeline, watching him. However, this was not the only strange creature spotted by the couple. One evening in spring, as Hilda went to the back of the house near the water tank to throw away the garbage, she saw a white-haired Bigfoot with large fangs, two on the bottom jaw and two on the top, with deep-set eyes and a goat-like stench. She said that it appeared almost as a very old woman and was drinking from the hose attached to the water tank. When the being saw Hilda, it just took off up the hill. A third creature was seen by Andrew. One night he was watching TV and the window was open to the screen. He suddenly felt that familiar sense of being watched and looked at the window. Pressed up against the screen was the face of something bending over to look in. With how high the window was, Andrew guessed that the being must have stood at least 9 feet tall. He said that this one was a sandy color, except for its hands, which had only 4 fingers, and described by Andrew, they looked almost like dark claws. These claws were also pressed up against the screen as the being looked into the home. The Stones' new dog, Sunday, was not raising hell, but instead was parked under a chair shivering. Although Andrew said he was not afraid of this creature, it was a different feeling from the dark furred creature that frightened him so much. He was concerned for his family, so they all drove off and stayed in a motel for the night. Nightly interruptions continued, stones being thrown at the house, someone or something slamming the pipe on the water tank so hard to make this loud metallic clang, the dogs in the neighborhood going berserk, the strange part human, part inhuman wailing noise, seeing red eyes in the underbrush. But one night, something would happen that would just push the Stones over the edge. Now, this event happened near the end of June when the Stones had finally decided that they'd had enough of the weird disturbances and they were looking actively for a different place to live. Andrew had been watching TV and had fallen asleep when Hilda came into the room at around 3:30 in the morning and woke him up, motioning for him to keep quiet. The front doorknob was jiggling. Now, their dog Sunday was not up in arms at all, but like in the case of the sandy Sasquatch at the window, was shaking with terror. Andrew grabbed his handy-dandy shotgun, which he kept hidden behind the door. Hilda unlatched the door, and they saw, standing on their doorstep, no, not Bigfoot, but two young men with black hair, who immediately, simultaneously said, "We don't want to be hurt." The two claimed that they had run out of gas about 7 miles down the road and asked if they could borrow a dime to call for help, and they did mean borrow. They said that they'd return the dime once help came. Andrew Stone closed the door, found a dime, placed it directly into one of the boys' hands, then closed the door, realized that there was no light in the phone booth, which was only about 200 yards right down the road. He could see it from his house. Opened the door again to offer them a flashlight, but when he did so, the two boys were gone and the night outside was absolutely silent. Now, the whole situation seemed very odd to both Hilda and Andrew, but Andrew thought that something else about the two boys seemed very odd. He said that the clothes they were wearing seemed absolutely new, like right off the rack from the store new, right down to their black leather shoes, which for walking anywhere, not much less, 7 miles in this wildernessy area, were perfectly clean and shiny. When he placed the dime in the boy's outstretched hand, he said that he made point to contact the hand to make sure that he wasn't going to drop the dime, and he said it felt like there was nothing there. What's more, Andrew said that he could not remember their eyes, and that even the details of their faces remained fuzzy. Hilda Stone said it best when she said, "It sounds like we were dreaming, but we were wide awake." The young couple and their son moved out shortly thereafter. So this is a very odd case, and bears striking resemblance to a lot of experiences more conventionally related to ufology. Though I will say, this is not the first Bigfoot case, let alone cryptid case, with classic Men in Black type overtones that I've run across, but all things in due time. Now, the first thing I will say to get out of the way is yes, yet again, another dog bites the dust in a very gruesome fashion. It bears repeating that the later dog, in the presence of the Bigfoot sightings and also the presence of the strange two boys that came to the door in the middle of the night, did not go on high alert, but instead would cower in fear under the nearest piece of furniture, and lived. I've brought it up time and time again, aside from their material position as guardians of the home, perhaps more importantly for high strangeness encounters, dogs represent the guardianship between us and the other. And in this case, the dog that pursued perished, while the other dog, which cowered in fear, did not. The cross section of poltergeist and Bigfoot reports has been noted by many researchers, including John Keel more recently, Joshua Cutchin, and Timothy Renner. A lot of the initial encounters are truly a kind of classic poltergeist manifestation, especially the bumps and thumps and stones being thrown at the house. That is a big one. One of the great classic manifestations of poltergeist is the throwing of stones. And here we just chalk it up to Bigfoot because, hey, Bigfoot was spotted in the area. Now, interestingly enough, this case follows the classic haunted house trope that we see very often in horror movies as well as in actual haunted locations. A young family moves into a house, is beset by various paranormalities, and then, as soon as they possibly can, they get the heck out of there. It's just that in this case, it was due to an influx of Bigfoot encounters, not ghouls of the ghostly variety. Again, if there must be any sort of distinction. However, and it is a big however, we also have this kind of interesting triumvirate of Sasquatches here, the dark figure, the white-furred female, and then the sandy one. The sandy one is, in my opinion, the closest to a classic Sasquatch, even though even with that, it had only four fingers, claws even, which were pressed up against the screen. The white-furred Sasquatch, shout out to where the footprints end, calls to mind the archetypal figure of the crone, and the dark one, for all intents and purposes, is very much like a classic Shadow Man sighting, especially with the level of fear that the stones ascribe to it. When the stones described these kind of silent moments which would happen around the disturbances caused apparently by the Sasquatches, this really kind of blends in with Jenny Randall's concept of the Oz factor, where it seems as though the world stops in the presence of anomalous phenomena. The stones claimed that there would be no noise, all the bugs and birds would stop when they would suddenly hear the strange wailing or see one of the Sasquatch like creatures, or, of course, their nightly visitors. Three toed footprints, as well, while tied to many Sasquatch sightings, tend to be associated with those which have more high strangeness elements, such as other appearances of UFO like objects or lights in the sky or poltergeist manifestations. Now, interestingly enough, too, there is a lot of folklore about babies being especially vulnerable to whatever it is that these denizens of the other world are trying to do. Combine this with Andrew seeing the strange face pressed up against the window. This has a definite precedence in Celtic fairy lore, where certain of the good folk would be claimed to press their faces up against the window, often with the aim of seeing and then finally stealing the baby from within the home. However, in my opinion, the real spooky part of this narrative has got to be the sighting of the two young men coming up to the house in the middle of the night. Now, I'll be honest, after reading many encounters of the Men in Black and related entities, I do think that a large subset of that group may just be chalked up to people being weird. I know it's hard to believe, but it happens. Now, while it is, of course, a possibility that these two guys were some sort of bizarre and elaborate prank to spook the stones and get a free dime, given the weirdness surrounding this event, I tend to view them as anomalous. The main reason for this is the trope of ghosts, phantoms, spirits, whatever you want to call it, showing up in pristine clothes in places where there should be some trace at all of wear of dust or dirt. Also, the narrative calls to mind many encounters with, you probably guessed it, the good folk, fairies, whatever you want to call them. We touched on that recently with the infamous mince pie Martians, the trading of assistance, food, water, small tokens of hospitality to anomalous beings is a long running concept in most mystical traditions. However, the spookiest thing is the lack of facial features in this case, particularly the eyes. This is especially unnerving to me because typically, if there is a standout feature of an anomalous beings, it is the eyes. And on the topic of eyes as well, this case bears a striking similarity, indeed seems almost like a predecessor, to the black eyed children phenomena, an offshoot of the Men in Black. Witnesses claim to see children with, get this, completely black eyes, hence the name, dressed often in new but outdated clothing, which come to their door and ask assistance, often in pairs. Does that sound familiar? It's odd, too, that these entities, kids, whatever you want to call them, just started jiggling the door handle, something observed yet again in many classic cases of hauntings. Another odd thing, however, is their initial statement, "We don't want to be hurt." For one thing, Andrew was hiding the shotgun behind the door so they couldn't see it. Maybe they didn't need to. For another thing, the Stones claimed that they spoke at once. Again, with so many cases of anomalous beings, simultaneous action, behaving as one, though apparently separate, seems to be very prevalent. Also, that statement, to me at least, it feels very manipulative, saying we don't want to be hurt. It feels as though they're trying to establish that they can be hurt, that they don't pose a threat, and then also asking for assistance. This asking of assistance is yet another one of those tropes that seems to run across all apparently different types of paranormal phenomena, and incidentally is one of the hardwired ways, psychologically speaking, to get almost any human to trust you. Now, perhaps creepiest of all, and yes, before I say this, I know the children appear to be older teens, but it does really make me wonder if it is at all tied to those eerie cries of "Mama, Mama," which echoed through the woods, growing less and less human with each call. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Bigfoot siege of Littlerock, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. Check that out for the works cited page for this and other episodes. And please tune into the podcast Somewhere in the Skies, not only for the very best in anomalous listening, but also every other Friday, that is the home of the audio versions of Just Another Tinfoil Hat. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.